The Great Rivalry, a bedtime tale of two neighbors. Chapter 1, The Narrow Blue Ribbon. Close your eyes now and take a deep, slow breath. Imagine you are standing on a quiet, sandy beach at the very edge of England. It is night. The air is cool and smells of salt and ancient secrets. Across the water, just 21 miles away, lies the coast of France. For thousands of years, these two lands have stared at each other across that narrow blue ribbon of water we call the English Channel. Tonight, we are going to travel back through the mist of time. We are going to explore why these two neighbors, Britain and France, have spent so many centuries arguing, fighting, and competing, only to become the closest of allies in the end. It is a story of kings and queens, of grand castles and salty seas, but told in a way that lets your mind drift and wander into a peaceful sleep. To understand why they were so against each other, we must go back nearly 1,000 years. We go back to the year 1066. In this time, the world was smaller, and the lines between countries were blurred like a watercolor painting. The conqueror and the crown. In 1066, a man named William, the Duke of Normandy, looked across the water from France toward England. He believed the English throne belonged to him. On a cold October morning, he landed his ships and changed the course of history forever. This moment, the Battle of Hastings, is the very root of the rivalry. Suddenly, the King of England was also a powerful lord in France. This created a strange, messy knot that took 700 years to untie. Imagine two neighbors sharing a garden, but neither can agree on where the fence should be. For centuries, the English kings felt they were part French, and the French kings felt the English were overstepping their bounds. As you breathe in and out, imagine the knights of that time. Their armor clinks softly in the wind. They spoke a mix of languages. In fact, for hundreds of years, the noble people of England spoke French, while the common people spoke Old English. This is why our language today is such a beautiful, complicated mix. We have cows in the field, which is an English word, but we eat beef at the table, which comes from the French word boeuf. Even in the way we speak, these two rivals are forever joined. The 100 years of shadows. As the centuries drifted by like clouds, the tension grew. We move now into a period known as the 100 Years' War. It wasn't just one war, but a long, slow series of disagreements that lasted from 1337 until 1453. Think of this era as a long autumn evening. The fires are lit in the great stone hearths. This was the time of Edward III and the Black Prince. It was a time when the English longbow became famous, whispering through the air at battles like Agincourt. But it was also the time of a young girl named Joan of Arc. Imagine her standing in the fields of France, listening to the wind. She became a symbol of French spirit, a light in the dark for her people. She helped push the English back across the Channel, reclaiming the French lands. By the time this long era ended, the two nations had finally begun to see themselves as truly different. England felt like an island nation, protected by the sea. France felt like a great power of the land, against each other feeling wasn't just about land anymore. It was about who they were. It was about pride. It was about the identity of the rose versus the lily, the sun king and the sea dogs. The story moves forward now, sliding smoothly like a boat on a calm river. We reach the 1600s and 1700s. This was the age of elegance, of powdered wigs and golden palaces. In France, King Louis XIV, the Sun King, built the magnificent palace of Versailles. He wanted France to be the center of the world, shining like the sun. But across the water, the British were building the most powerful navy the world had ever seen. This was a new kind of rivalry. It was no longer just about who owned a specific forest or a castle. It was a race to see who could reach the furthest corners of the map. They competed in the snowy woods of Canada, the humid heat of India, and the tropical islands of the Caribbean. When you hear the names of these old ships, the Victory, the Redoubtable, imagine them creaking gently on the waves. There was a strange kind of respect between the sailors of both nations, even as they faced one another. They were two masters of the globe, each refusing to blink. The great storm of revolution. Then came the year 1789. A great storm of change swept through France. The old ways were torn down, and out of the smoke rose one of the most famous figures in all of history, Napoleon Bonaparte. To the British, Napoleon was a terrifying force of nature. He moved across Europe like a tide. For nearly 20 years, the two nations were locked in a struggle that felt like the end of the world. This was the time of Admiral Nelson at Trafalgar and the Duke of Wellington at Waterloo. Imagine the quiet after a great storm. In 1815, the long centuries of constant war finally began to fade. The two rivals were exhausted. They had fought on land and sea for 700 years. And as the sun set on the 19th century, something wonderful began to happen. The anger began to turn into a quiet, nodding respect. Chapter 2. The Friendly Understanding. As we continue our journey, let the weight of your blankets feel heavy and warm, like a soft cloak from a long-lost century. We have left behind the smoke of Waterloo and the thundering hoofbeats of Napoleon's cavalry. The air is growing calmer now. We are entering the 1800s, a time when the world began to change faster than ever before. For a long time, Britain and France were like two old boxers who had gone 15 rounds and were simply too tired to swing again. They sat in their corners, nursing their bruises, and began to look at each other with a new kind of curiosity. In the middle of the 19th century, a remarkable thing happened. A young Queen Victoria sat on the British throne, and across the water, France was eventually led by Napoleon III. Despite their grandfathers being the bitterest of enemies, these two leaders did something unexpected. They visited one another. Imagine the scene at the harbor in France. The sky is a soft violet hue. Queen Victoria steps off a steamship, a new invention of iron and coal, and is greeted with flowers and music. It was the first time a British monarch had visited France in peace for over 400 years. This was the beginning of what the French call l'entente cordiale, or the friendly understanding. It wasn't a formal law or a rigid contract. It was something more like a promise between two neighbors to stop shouting over the fence and start sharing the shade of the trees. They realized that the world was becoming a complicated place, and having a friend nearby was much better than having a rival. The age of steam and steel. As you drift deeper into relaxation, imagine the sound of a steam train clicking along the tracks. In the late 1800s, the two countries began to build things together. They were no longer just sharing words, they were sharing ideas. French fashion filled the shops of London, and British industrial machines powered the factories of Paris. The against each other feeling started to turn into a game of anything you can do, I can do better. If France built a beautiful opera house, Britain would build a grand library. If Britain built a faster ship, France would design a more elegant bridge. This was a time of peace, often called the Beautiful Epic. People would take the ferry across the channel just to have lunch in a different country. The tension hadn't vanished completely. Neighbors will always have their small disagreements, but the old hatred was melting away like morning mist under a warm sun. Side by side in the great dark, the true test of this new friendship came when the 20th century arrived. The year was 1914. A great shadow fell over Europe, and for the first time in nearly 1,000 years, the British and the French did not turn their weapons on each other. Instead, they stood shoulder to shoulder. Think of the quiet of the countryside. Imagine the vast, rolling fields where the red poppies grow. For 4 long years, millions of British and French soldiers lived in the same mud, shared the same bread, and protected the same line. The rivalry of the past was buried in the earth. They were no longer the British, and the French, in the old way, they were allies. When that great struggle ended, the bond was sealed in stone. But history is a long river with many bends. Only 20 years later, in 1939, the shadows returned. During the Second Great War, when France was occupied, the British opened their doors. London became the home of the Free French. General Charles de Gaulle spoke to his people over the British radio waves, his voice traveling through the night air, over the waves of the Channel, giving hope to those waiting in the dark. When the sun finally rose on peace in 1945, the two nations were forever changed. They had saved each other. The old stories of kings fighting for crowns felt like a very distant dream. The modern mirror. Now let your mind return to the present day. Think of the modern world, where a great tunnel runs deep beneath the sea, connecting the two lands. You can travel from the heart of London to the center of Paris in just a few hours, moving through the quiet darkness under the ocean floor. Today, the rivalry is mostly a friendly one. It lives on in football matches and jokes about who has the better food or the better weather. The British might tease the French about their many types of cheese, and the French might tease the British about their love of tea and rain. But beneath the teasing is a deep, ancient bond. They are like two siblings who grew up fighting over toys, then grew into adults who realized they are the only ones who truly understand each other's history. They are two old souls staring at each other across 21 miles of blue water. They have shared 1,000 years of stories. They have been enemies, rivals, partners, and friends. And as the stars twinkle over the English Channel tonight, both lands are at peace. The white cliffs of Dover reflect the moonlight, and the lighthouses of Normandy blink back a steady, rhythmic hello. The world is quiet. The history is settled. The blue ribbon of water is calm. Chapter 3: The Tale of the Two Kitchens. Now let your mind drift toward the warmth of a kitchen fire. Imagine the scent of baking bread and the soft clatter of porcelain plates. As we continue our story of these two neighbors, we must look at one of the most peaceful and yet most passionate battles they ever fought. This was not a war of swords or ships, but a competition of flavors, textures, and traditions. For hundreds of years, the British and the French have defined themselves by what they put on their dinner tables. To understand the rivalry, one must understand the difference between a golden, flaky croissant and a thick, buttery slice of toasted bread. In the early days, the French looked at cooking as an art form, like painting or music. In the grand courts of the French kings, chefs were like famous celebrities. They spent hours reducing sauces until they were as smooth as silk. They invented the mother sauces, velvety white creams, and rich, dark gravies that required patience and a gentle touch. For the French, a meal was a ceremony, a slow appreciation of the gifts of the earth. Across the water, the British took a different path. They looked at the rolling green hills of their island and saw the finest cattle and the heartiest grains. British cooking was about the strength of the ingredients themselves. Think of a massive Sunday roast sizzling in the oven, or a heavy pudding filled with dried fruits and spices. It was honest, sturdy food designed to keep a person warm against the misty Atlantic winds. The great exchange of taste. As the two nations grew closer in the 1800s, their kitchens began to speak to one another. This is one of the most charming parts of our story. While the generals were resting, the chefs were traveling. A famous French chef named Auguste Escoffier moved to London. He took the wild energy of the British capital and refined it with French elegance. He worked at the Savoy Hotel, bringing the delicate touch of Paris to the heart of the British Empire. Suddenly, the British upper classes were falling in love with French names for their food. They began to call their menus la carte and their appetizers hors d'oeuvres. But the exchange went both ways. The French, who had always loved their wine, began to admire the British obsession with tea. Imagine the steam rising from a delicate china cup in a London drawing room, and then imagine that same ritual finding its way into the cafes of Paris. Even the word steak traveled across the water. The French took the English beefsteak and turned it into biftec. They took the British love for hearty meat and added their own magic, a dollop of herb butter, a side of thin, crispy potatoes, and created something entirely new. the cheese, and the grain. If you listen closely to the silence of the night, you might imagine the quiet cellars where these two nations store their greatest treasures. France is a land of 1,000 cheeses. From the soft, snowy rind of a brie to the pungent blue veins of a Roquefort, the French treated cheese like a map of their country. Every village had its own flavor, its own secret way of turning milk into gold. They believed that a meal without cheese was like a day without sunshine. Britain, meanwhile, focused on the sturdy craft of the cheddar. In the caves of Somerset, they aged great wheels of cheese until they were sharp and crumbly. It was a different kind of beauty, strong, reliable, and enduring. In this competition of the kitchen, there was never a true winner, and that is the secret of their relationship. By trying to outdo one another, they both created something magnificent. The British learned the grace of a fine sauce, and the French learned to appreciate the simple power of a well-roasted joint of meat. The ritual of the table. Think now about the way these two neighbors spend their evenings. In a French village, the shops close early. The baker, the butcher, and the florist all head home. The dinner table is the heart of the house. Conversations last for hours. The sun goes down, the candles flicker low, and the talk flows like wine. It is a slow, rhythmic way of life that values the moment above all else. In a British home, there is the comfort of the tea. It is a word that means both a drink and a meal. It is the sound of a kettle whistling on the stove and the sight of a cozy fire. It is about feeling safe and tucked in. As you lie there now, imagine these two styles of comfort overlapping: the elegance of France and the coziness of Britain. They are like two different melodies played on the same piano. They clash sometimes, yes, but when they find the right chord, the music is beautiful. The rivalry of the kitchen taught these two nations that being different is what makes life interesting. If every country cooked the same food, the world would be a very dull place. By holding on to their own traditions while tasting the traditions of their neighbor, the UK and France created a shared culture that is richer than it ever could have been if they were alone. A shared harvest. Today, when you walk down a street in London, you smell the butter of a French bakery. When you walk down a street in Paris, you might find a shop selling traditional British marmalade. The war of the kitchens has ended in a feast where everyone is invited. The fields of France and the pastures of Britain sleep now under the same moon. The grapes in the vineyards are resting, and the wheat in the English fields is still. There is no more fighting over the fence. Instead, there is only the quiet appreciation of a good meal and a long, peaceful night. The history of their taste is a history of learning to love what the neighbor brings to the table. And as you drift further toward sleep, you can almost taste the sweetness of that friendship, a blend of two worlds, seasoned by time and softened by peace. Chapter 4. The Language of the Sea and Sky. Let your thoughts drift now to the horizon, where the deep blue of the ocean meets the pale silk of the sky. For 1,000 years, the English Channel was a wall. It was a moat of cold, churning water that kept these two neighbors apart. But as time moved forward, the sea stopped being a barrier and started becoming a bridge. Imagine the great sailing ships of the past. Their tall wooden masts creak like old trees in the wind, and their white sails swell with the salt air. For a long time, the British and the French were the two greatest sailors in the world. They raced each other across the Atlantic and around the tip of Africa. They were like two explorers trying to find the end of a dream. But the sea is a lonely place, and sailors have a way of understanding each other that people on land do not. Even when their countries were at odds, a French captain and a British captain shared the same stars and the same storms. They used the same maps and followed the same moon. Over time, the language of the sea became a shared language. The dream of the tunnel. For hundreds of years, people looked at that 21-mile stretch of water and wondered, what if we could walk across? The first plans for a tunnel were drawn up over 200 years ago. Imagine a tunnel lit by flickering candles, with horse-drawn carriages trotting through a stone tube deep under the waves. At the time, it seemed like a fairy tale. The British were nervous about losing their island protection, and the French were busy with their own revolutions. But the dream never died. It slept beneath the seabed for generations. Finally, in the late 20th century, the two nations decided it was time to shake hands beneath the earth. Think of the massive machines, like giant iron moles, chewing through the chalk and rock. One machine started in England, and the other started in France. They worked in the dark, miles from the shore, moving slowly toward each other. In December of the year 1990, a small hole was broken through the rock. A British worker and a French worker reached through and shook hands. It was a moment that ended 1,000 years of separation. Now, the trains glide through that tunnel in total silence, carrying thousands of people every day. The wall has truly become a doorway. The bird of peace, Concorde. As your mind lifts from the depths of the sea, imagine looking up into the bright, clear sky. In the 1960s, the two neighbors decided to build something that the world had never seen before. They wanted to build a plane that could fly faster than the speed of sound. They called it Concorde. The word itself means agreement or harmony. Imagine this beautiful, slender white bird with its pointed nose and triangular wings. It was a masterpiece of engineering, born from the combined brains of British and French scientists. They had to learn how to work together, translating inches into centimeters and sharing their most guarded secrets. When Concorde took to the sky, it was a symbol of what the two rivals could achieve when they stopped competing and started creating. It traveled so fast that it could chase the sun across the Atlantic, arriving in New York before it had even left London or Paris. It was a bridge made of silver and speed, proving that the sky was not a limit, but a shared playground. The mirror of the coastline. If you were to fly high above the channel today, you would see how the two coastlines mirror each other. The white cliffs of Dover in England look almost exactly like the white cliffs of Normandy in France. They are made of the same ancient stone, born from the same earth millions of years ago. The sea that once kept them apart is now what brings them together. Fishermen from both sides cast their nets into the same cold waters. They watch the same lighthouses blink in the dark. The against each other feeling has been smoothed over by the waves, like a rough piece of glass turned into a soft sea gem by the tide. As you breathe slowly, think of the channel not as a divide, but as a shared valley filled with water. It is a place of memory, where the ghosts of old ships rest peacefully on the sand. There's no more thunder of cannons, only the rhythmic hush, hush of the waves hitting the shore. The two neighbors are no longer guarding their beaches against each other. Instead, they are looking out at the same horizon, waiting for the same sunrise. The sea is calm, the sky is vast, and the bridge between them, whether through the air or under the waves, is stronger than it has ever been. Chapter 5: The Modern Friendship and the Future Sleep. We have traveled through 1,000 years of history, from the clinking armor of knights to the silent glid of trains beneath the sea. Now, as the story begins to settle and the night grows deep, let us look at the world as it is today. The relationship between the United Kingdom and France is what we might call a grand friendship. It is like two old characters in a book who have known each other since the very first page. They have had their arguments, their long silences, and their moments of great bravery together. Because of all that history, they understand one another in a way no one else can. If you go to a cafe in Paris or a quiet pub in an English village, you will still hear the gentle echoes of the old rivalry. But today, it is a rivalry of the spirit. It is found on the rugby pitch, where the players run with the strength of their ancestors, or in the bright lights of a stadium during a football match. When they play against each other, the energy is electric. But when the game is over, they shake hands. They have learned that a good rival makes you better, stronger, and sharper. The shared heart of art and song. Think of the way the two cultures have woven themselves together like a colorful tapestry. British musicians have long found inspiration in the lights of Paris, and French artists have spent lifetimes trying to capture the soft, misty gray light of London. The stories of the two lands are intertwined. The legends of King Arthur are told in both languages. The poems written in the trenches of the great wars belong to both peoples. They share a love for the theater, for the cinema, and for the quiet beauty of a garden in the rain. Even their differences have become a source of comfort. The British admire the French sense of style and their passion for life. The French admire the British sense of humor and their steady, calm nature. They are like two different instruments, perhaps a violin and a cello playing the same beautiful song. Each one sounds fine alone, but together they create a harmony that fills the room. The guardians of the gate. In the modern world, the United Kingdom and France stand together as the guardians of a long tradition of freedom and creativity. They are two of the oldest democracies, two of the most influential voices in the room. When the world faces a challenge, these two old neighbors usually find themselves standing on the same side of the line. They are no longer fighting over where the fence should be. Instead, they are working together to protect the world they both helped to build. From the satellites in space to the scientists working in labs, the against each other feeling has been replaced by a with each other strength. They are the gatekeepers of Europe's history, holding the keys to a past that was often violent, but a future that is bright with hope. The final horizon. As we reach the end of our bedtime journey, imagine the sun setting over the English Channel once more. The sky is a deep, velvety blue, the color of a king's cloak. The stars are beginning to wake up, one by one, looking down on the two lands. On the English side, the sheep are huddled in the dark green fields. On the French side, the vineyards are quiet and still. The water between them is like a sheet of dark glass, reflecting the moon. The rivalry that lasted for 1,000 years has become a story we tell to help us understand who we are. It is a reminder that even the deepest disagreements can turn into the strongest friendships. It tells us that time has a way of healing all wounds, and that peace is the natural state of the world when we take the time to listen to our neighbor's story. Britain and France are no longer two warriors staring across a moat. They are two old friends sitting on a porch, watching the tide come in. They have nothing left to prove to one another. They have survived the storms of history, and they have come out on the other side together. Closing your eyes to the past, now let the history fade away. Let the names of the kings and the dates of the battles drift off like autumn leaves on a slow-moving stream. The story is finished. The book is being gently closed. The United Kingdom is at rest. France is at rest. The great blue ribbon of the Channel is at rest. The air is still, and your breath is slow and steady. You are safe in the present, protected by the long peace that these two nations worked so hard to find. As you drift off into a deep and dreamless sleep, remember that even the oldest rivals can find a way to walk together in the light. The world is quiet. The history is written. The night is yours. Sleep now. Sleep in the peace of the ages. Good night.